Bryan Something or Another is brought to you by highscorereviews.com.
Hi. It's been a while. I haven't done one of these in a few months now. Not because I didn't want to, it's just nothing's really come out of me and, bothered me, or if there's just something I want to talk about in general. Welcome to Bryan Something or Another. That's what I want to call it from now on, because no one else was giving me any good names, so that's the only thing that came up to the top of my head. So here we go. Tokyo Game Show just happened. And the big thing out of there was, or one of the big things was, Final Fantasy 15 got a trailer. And everybody rejoiced. Then they watched it and went, eh? So that's going to be interesting how that pans out, because right now it was like 4 J-pop guys got together. They're searching for a girl. There happens to be monsters. It's like a weird in-betweeners American Pie movie right now. So I don't know why my mind just went automatically to those films, probably just because 4 dudes. But something was said before the TGS show, and it was said between, excuse me if I pronounce this name wrong, Hironobu Sakaguchi and a reporter from Kotaku talking about Final Fantasy 15. And something struck a chord with me, and what was said from the producer of Final Fantasy was this: if Final Fantasy 15 doesn't do well, perhaps there's not much of a future for console games. And this bothered me a lot, actually. It was just very, very nonchalant about it. Just like, you know what? We just spent 9 years making this game. If it doesn't do well, meh. Which just really bothers me. And the reason it bothers me, I think, there's a few reasons. First off, that Final Fantasy 15 at this point has been in development for 8 years. Since the beginning of the PS3, essentially. Was Final Fantasy 13 Versus, and then the PS4 came out and they rebranded it Final Fantasy 15. So let's take a look at the Final Fantasy games that have come out since the beginning of the PS3 that I can remember anyway. Final Fantasy 13, which people majority just kind of pushed it away and said this isn't Final Fantasy because of its linear gameplay. Since then, there's been 2 sequels to Final Fantasy 13. There's been Final Fantasy 14 MMO, which was terrible, and then they re-released it as Final Fantasy 14 A Realm Reborn, which is actually doing very well. And then we were treated to the high definition version of Final Fantasy X. Okay, so essentially since Final Fantasy 13, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 Final Fantasy games coming onto a console. What in the name of hell is taking you so long, and when I say you, I mean Square Enix, what is taking so long with this game? 8 years. If an American company took 8 years to make a game, they would be bankrupt. Your development team has to be, I don't know, 10 people. That I would understand. And I understand having to go back and rebrand something because you don't want to associate it with a game that pretty much failed critically at the very least. And it's been 8 years, so why not just call it 15 at this point? I understand that. But to take 8 years to come out with a game is kind of ridiculous. And this isn't just Square's problem either. We have The Last Guardian, which is, I believe, Sony Japan. At this point now, it's probably like 5 or 6 years into development. Now, some of you might be saying, well, what about Persona? Persona is a big one. Their last Persona game on a console wasn't until the end of PlayStation 2. That's fine. Atlas is a smaller company, they have smaller development teams, and it's not like that development team wasn't working on something else between Persona 4 and Persona 5, which is, I'm assumingly, coming out next year for PS3 and PS4. They made Catherine in the middle, so they were doing other things. Nobody's been doing anything in that development team except for Final Fantasy 15, as far as I know. But then there's also another aspect to this that needs to be looked at. Another aspect is that the world changed. Okay, we got these tablets, we got these smartphones, we got mobile gaming, and Japanese business, as far as game development, seemed to be going towards the handheld market, which is fine. They should be doing that. But you can't sit there and be shocked that you're not selling PlayStation 4s or Xbox Ones in your country when you're just nonchalantly just taking your time with the games in general. Now, granted, that could change. Final Fantasy 15 could come out and it sells PS4s, and it sells millions of copies, and everybody rejoices. But just the pure nonchalantness of like, hey, you know what, if we don't make another Final Fantasy 15 on a console, no big deal. It is a big deal. Final Fantasy has been a staple since Nintendo, essentially. But when you sit there and you complain about the console market not selling your games, maybe it's because you're taking 8 goddamn years with it. And number 2, if you're going to put all your resources into handheld gaming, making better games than your actual console games, of course it's going to fail. Alright, now I'm not saying that this is one company's fault or even 2 companies' fault, but if you don't see another Final Fantasy 15 game made for a console, Square, and you decide not to do that because of lack of sales, aren't you kind of the problem in the first place?